This is from a chapter in Strange Fruit, where the three of them, the Deans, Mrs. Dean, her two children, Tracy and Lara, have been having breakfast together. There is a revival meeting going on in the town, and they are prominent church people, and Mrs. Dean is very anxious for her children to take part in it. Neither one of them has attended the meeting. Lara is getting ready to go out and play tennis. As she tells her mother, Tracy said, "It's 93 in the shade, if that means anything to you." "Oh, it's always 93. Best thing is to ignore it." "You'll be back in time for a bath before the service?" her mother said. "I don't know, Mother." "But you plan to attend, don't you?" "I don't know, Mother." Tracy laughed. Mrs. Dean looked at him with, she believed, no expression at all, turned to Lara. "Lara, I feel it's our duty to support the church in this revival." "But why?" Lara spoke with unusual sharpness. "Why, Mother? It's always so stupid. Last night, those mill people, wallowing in the sawdust." "Because," Mrs. Dean ignored Lara's description, "people need to be awakened. There's never been a time in our country when religion was at the low ebb it now is. Since the war, young people have grown away from the church, drinking, girls smoking, things happening in cars. Oh, but so much. But why such a crude method of winning us to God?" "I don't like that criticism, Lara. I'm sorry, Mummy, but in this day to use frontier methods to save us does seem crude, or worse. This isn't only a revival. It's a community project," her mother said. "While some things may seem a bit old-fashioned or unnecessary, from our point of view, all of Maxwell has not had your opportunities. Remember that, Lara. And Brother Dunwoody has a message the people need, educated or uneducated. It is especially those poor mill people who do need God. And you must remember that none of us become so educated we can do without religion." Lara drank her coffee. Tracy looked at his sister, looked at his mother, smiled again. It was after this second smile that Alma upset her cup. She began to tremble, her cup slipped, a brown stream ran slowly down the cloth and on her dress. She could not remember ever having done such a thing. She was deeply disturbed, and after her children left the house, she went into Lara's room. Seeking peace in old familiar routines, she tidied up Lara's drawers, rearranged the books, looked over her dresses, and possessed once more the fringe of her life, clinging desperately now. And then, as she went through the bureau drawers, she found the clay torso. She found it in Lara's second drawer, wrapped in a wet cloth. Uncovered, it lay in her hand, urgent, damp, like something in gestation, a lump of wet dirt. She was not able to take her eyes from it. And as she stood unmoving, a red spot appeared in each cheek. Her clamped jaws squared, shuttling her face into fresh planes, destroying the glaze which gave Alma Dean what her friends ardently called her spiritual look. She held the little figure, stared at each detail as if she saw nakedness for the first time, as if all she had feared had come to life in that lump of dirt, as if in it were hidden the key to Lara's secrets and Lara's life, always as easily entered as Lara's room, now locked against her. In both she had once felt welcomed. She looked around the room. It was as inseparable a part of Lara as her grey eyes, her bed, her books, her desk. In that desk Lara kept her writings, when little her diaries, now older her letters, and it was by means of these letters that Alma had maintained so intimate a knowledge of her daughter's life and of her thoughts and her moods. For as Lara had grown older and talked less, Lara seemed to talk less each time she returned from college, Alma had leaned more heavily on the written words in the desk. Lara's friends' letters, her journal, kept during college days, meant so much to Alma, as did this room. When Lara was away, Alma often brought her mending in and sat in the old Morris chair, and occasionally, oh, most rarely, she had slept in Lara's bed, escaping Tut's masculinity. Feeling at times a desperate need, she would slip into Lara's room, and on those nights her sleep would be dreamless and peaceful. Like a child, she had counted the weeks throughout winter until Lara's return, and now that Lara was here, the air was heavy with the slamming of doors, shutting her out of her life. She was different, withdrawn, uncooperative. For instance, about the revival meeting. Anyone brought up in a religious home in Maxwell knows that revivals are necessary for the community. And yet at breakfast right before Tracy too, and Lara knows that Tracy needs to be encouraged to go to church, she had criticized the revival and how he had enjoyed it. She looked at the clay figure. If it had any beauty in it, but no, only nakedness. Why should Lara want to make naked things? A pelvis. What had she been thinking of that would make her want to make a pelvis? A man, a boy, you could understand men being dirty, like that men seem made that way, but your own daughter? Spending her time making naked things. What did she do it for? Oh, she'd call it art, and her lips would grow tight and thin as she said it. This was what she had been doing. Every day she had been going somewhere, like Tracy. It made Alma remember a day long ago. She and 3-year-old Lara had gone into the library where a breeze could be felt, and she had sat watching the child play, watching the slow smile, which came and went on her solemn little face. Alma had been happy that day. She remembered with startling clearness her feeling of peace, as if the baby Lara had for all time answered an old nagging doubt. This child loved her. She loved it. Always they would understand each other. And then, as if something had crashed in the room, she turned quickly. What is it? She asked herself, her mind feeling around as one does for something run into in the dark. Tracy. So far away lunch seemed now, when last she had been with him. So remote had grown all the world, save that small fragment which enclosed Lara and herself. With the thought of him, the old burden of motherhood fell upon her. She hastily left the room to search for him, found him and his little black playmate Henry behind the cook's house, naked, unmindful of the broiling sun. They were crouched before an upturned washpot, beating upon it. Sweat poured from their grave faces, down their bodies. "We're playing savages," Tracy declared stoutly, deserted by Henry, who upon her appearance had shot like greased lightning into his mamma's cabin. "Savages? Yes'm, we're playing Africa." 6-year-old Blue Eyes looked into hers unwaveringly. "Why did you take your clothes off, Tracy?" "To play Africa." "Couldn't you play Africa with your clothes on?" "No, ma'am." "Why?" "'Cause Africa is nothing on." "Who suggested such an idea to you? Did Henry?" "No, ma'am." "Then why, Tracy, did you do it?" "It's a game." "Have you been doing anything else?" He shook his head. "Are you sure you're telling me the truth?" Her young son did not answer. "Tracy, you must answer me." He looked at her, face flushed, blue eyes dark with feeling, lips together. "You must answer me, Tracy." He did not answer. "You know that I must punish you for disobeying me?" He continued to look at her, his lips pressed tightly together. "You know that I should, Tracy." He stood there before her, blue eyes looking straight into hers, not moving. She had been shaken with fury by her son's stubborn silence, his refusal to admit her rightness, and now as she remembered it she grew angry again. So stiffly had he obeyed her, bearing his thin thighs to the switching. Only a few light strokes of a peach tree sprout had she given him, but when he put his pants on, breathing quickly, though making no sound, and walked away from her, she felt that she had lashed him brutally. Chilled by the thought, she had hurried into the room where Lara was playing, and had pulled the child into her arms, seeking her lost self-esteem, and the now lost peace. And Lara had snuggled close, patting her cheeks, pressing wet kisses on her face, until she was suffused once more with the warmth of the child's love and the comforting knowledge that she was a good mother. All these years Lara had given back to Alma what Tracy had taken away. And now, as she sat in Lara's room, holding the little clay torso, a hideous thought swept through her mind. Tracy is destroying Lara. Not directly, but by the subtle influence of his failures. His tight lips, his silence, his withdrawal from the family, his refusal to be someone worthwhile. The long hours spent wherever he spent his time, it was wickedly spent. This she knew, and Lara surely must be aware of this, now that she was grown. Because of it, was she losing faith in her mother? Did she believe it was her fault that Tracy was no good, a failure? Could she be so unfair, she who had always been so close, so loving? Could she not see that all her life Alma had slaved to make something out of that boy? Was she going to take his side now? She felt for the first time in her life that she might faint, and sat down. "It's the heat," she whispered. The room turned black, and for a moment she could see nothing. Then, with the infallible weapon of her belief in herself, she fought back doubt. She was right. She could not be wrong. With infinite patience she had planned Lara's life. She had built it with care. Nothing, no one could tear down what she had built with such thought and prayer. Alma breathed deeply, let her fingers relax, resting the figure on her lap. She had noticed lately that she was a bit nervous. After all, this is a little thing. After all, it is just a matter of idle hands. These months in Maxwell had made Lara restless. She quite likely, had copied this thing out of a book without realizing that it wasn't so nice. She remembered now a book around the house on Greek sculpture, though this didn't look much like Greek sculpture. No Greek sculpture she had ever seen had looked so naked. Odd, too, because of course it was naked. But there was a refined look about it, while this thing with its great bulges looked as naked as... Once she had helped her old fat grandma out of her chemise, and she had looked... Well, this thing looked like that, and there was no art about grandma. She remembered that the young Lara had gone through a foolish period when she thought she wanted to be an artist. It had begun with the reading of a book. Lara had rushed in, eyes shining. "Oh, Mother, I'm going to be an artist." Mrs. Dean had taken care to smile sympathetically as she replied, "I'm sure, dear, that your book must be interesting." "Oh, yes, it is, Mother. It makes me want to try. It makes me believe I can do something, really something." Mrs. Dean smiled into the eager face. "You can do something, dear. Mother has a plan for you." And as Lara listened, Alma told her of college, of university, of teaching in some girls' college. "You're all I have to count on, darling," she'd whispered, and had smoothed back Lara's light brown hair from her wide forehead, and told her of her wish for her to work for a Ph.D. "You would like that, wouldn't you? And I should be so proud of you. It is what I have always wanted to do myself." No more was said about art, and later Alma quietly burned the book. Mrs. Dean's eyes traced the curve of breast, of rounded belly, moved inexorably downward, lingered, seeing the figure dimly now through the opaque film of confident motherhood. She had met every exigency of Lara's life. This, too, she could take care of. She stood. Her face was calm, her jaws squared. Only the nostrils of her high nose quivered as she drew a deep, quiet breath. Then, taking the figure more securely between her plump white hands, she kneaded and pressed and pounded it with slow deliberateness until it was reduced to a shapeless wad. And walking swiftly through the hall, past Eenie in the kitchen, to the back porch, she dropped it in the garbage can. It lay there among corn shucks, okra stems, tomato skins. No more than the mud pies Lara used to make years ago. Just another of the little messes Alma had cleaned up after her young daughter. She lingered, looked out upon her back courtyard, blinded by the glare, feeling nothing, as if physical processes had stopped, blocked by some obstacle to which their pattern could not bend. Words moved through her mind, stripped of feeling. Lara must go back. She hasn't enough to do. He can't do this to her. I won't permit it. Miss Dean! Eenie called from the kitchen, modulating her voice to a bland mixture of subservience and reproof. It's way at 11 by the clock, and they're singing their heads off over at the tabernacle. Mrs. Dean turned to enter the kitchen. As she passed the garbage can, like a shadow come and gone, Lara's face trembled before her eyes. Eenie, I want you to make Miss Lara some fig ice cream, she said, her eyes focused now on nothing. And get my hat, please, will you? I'm late. In the dim hall before the old pier glass that had belonged to her mother, Mrs. Dean carefully adjusted her broad-brimmed white hat, carefully powdered her nose, smoothed her heavy black eyebrows, while gray eyes looked steadily back at her from the mirror, picked up her white pocketbook and linen handkerchief, took her hymnal from the console. At the front door she called to Eenie to tell Lara, should she come in, that she was at church.